Oh, we've all had it. Those moments when communication breaks down, when it becomes unhealthy, or even when it stops altogether. What can we do when we're stuck and unable to communicate? And more importantly, when they can't communicate with us? Today, we aren't talking about communication skills or communication styles. What we are talking about is what to do when our communication gets stuck. And we're stuck because of the unhealthy conversations of ego coming from our own ego or coming from the other person's ego. This podcast is all about helping you with your spiritual growth so you can overcome obstacles and manifest your destiny to crystallize all things good, basically to have success on life's journey. It's all about getting unstuck by unlocking your hidden power. So let's get started. Hi there and welcome. My name is Remy, like Do Re Mi. I'm a best-selling author and creator of the Get Unstuck Revolution. I help extraordinary women just like you dissolve the obstacles in your path so you can bring success to you. Now let's get started with today's video. Okay, let me jump off the screen here and switch to my laptop. We talk about this every week about the importance of positive thoughts and how negative thought patterns interrupt our vibration and sets up this barrier to the good things in life that we'd like to experience. And those negative thoughts all belong to ego. They're the thoughts of doubts, worries, fears, sometimes panic or how wrong everything is, or even those thoughts circling around in our head as we begin to come unhinged. And these thought patterns inside our head are difficult enough to deal with, but what happens when we find ourselves trying to communicate and either our ego takes over the conversation or the other person's ego has taken over the conversation? Why can't we find successful communication? Well, if you'd like to see success and full abundance along life's journey, and if you're wanting to tap into a greater knowingness and align with the higher consciousness of your infinite self, instead of the lower ego thinking and negative thoughts that push success away, then this is for you. It's time to be unabashedly, unapologetically, happily untethered to ego thinking. It's time to align with the higher energies of our soul's path instead. This episode is for you if you wonder, how does communication get stuck and how can we get it unstuck? How can I keep ego out of my conversations? And interesting, can the heart chakra help with heart to heart communications? Well, these episodes are about how to find your hidden power when you want to transform challenges into successes. I like to call it the audacity of alchemy. Because when we're feeling stuck, it's never the situation that has us stuck, it's our energy about it that's become stuck in anxiety, overwhelm, doubts, worries, frustrations, indecision, and even anger. And often this is because of a spiritual injury that we've experienced, some kind of hidden trauma. And boy, this can bleed over into our communication and our conversations. But no matter what, it isn't the pain of the situation, it's the pain of not being connected into the natural energy of who we really are, of being connected to that magical part of us that's a creative vibrational being who can use positive energies to create what we want and bring it into physical manifestation. We can allow our manifestations to materialize and not get stuck in the negative communication and negative vibrations that block them. These positive energies that we talk about so much are where we find the magic of alchemy, because our choice of frequency, our choice of those positive thoughts and emotions and positive communications can change the course of our journey. All right. So today is all about communication, specifically, why can't we communicate? Those moments when communication breaks down, when it becomes unhealthy, or even when it stops altogether, can be incredibly painful and frustrating. What can we do when we just can't communicate? And more importantly, when they can't communicate with us? Well, let's begin here. Let's begin with a few common ways that we get stuck and see if you can find yourself in any of these examples. I'll put these up on the screen for you. Do you ever find yourself becoming more emphatic as you try to make your point? You may start talking over the person or talk faster to get everything said before they shut you down or before they walk away. Do you ever find yourself getting frustrated, getting angry, or maybe turning up the emotion, turning up the volume so the other person will hear you? This is mostly done with manipulation or intimidation in mind. Do you ever find yourself giving up, giving in, or just nodding off because the conversation is going nowhere? Do you ever find yourself storming out of the room, hanging up if you're on the phone, or otherwise dramatizing in the hopes the other person will finally listen? Do you ever find yourself heading for the refrigerator to soothe your emotions, or even grabbing a drink or a drug to avoid your emotions altogether? Do you ever find yourself burying yourself in a TV show or a book? Also, an avoidance tactic. Do you ever find yourself steaming about how wrong the other person is? Oh, I've never done this. And then going over and over all the things you wish you'd said. Now, you may have found yourself in this position or one of these positions, or maybe you've witnessed someone else doing it to you. And of course, there are other gaslighting and blackmailing techniques that are filled with anger and blame and judgment that we could talk about, but I think you get the picture. Okay, so why does communication get stuck? A good conversation should be a healthy game of ping pong, back and forth, and back and forth. In fact, so funny, I had a very heated but very delightful exchange with somebody on social media the other day. And even though we're peers, we had very different opinions, but both of us actually wanted to understand the other's viewpoint. So there was no game playing and nobody resorted to anything unkind. And I actually told her it was the most interesting conversation I've had in a long time. The idea is that we shouldn't get stuck. Communication should be like a ping pong game. So, why does it sometimes get stuck? Well, let's blame it on our old friend, ego. Because remember, our ego is trying to protect us. And so it will pull out the most insidious tactics. And that's why, if we're in an unhealthy conversation, it's very likely that our ego or the other person's ego has decided to join the party. All right. So, what can we do when communication isn't working? Well, often at the base of an unhealthy conversation, we find that there's something that we just don't want to hear, or there's something that the other person just doesn't want to hear. So, a simple shift in perspective, and remember, because we talk about this a lot here, healing is simply a shift in perspective. So, in an unhealthy conversation, we often need a shift in perspective to heal the communication. It's very likely that something hurtful has been said, and so a shift in perspective is needed immediately. Now, maybe we can't get there just yet. Maybe we're feeling defensive or some other negative emotions are presenting. Maybe we just need a little breather. I often tell my clients that it's perfectly okay to say, I don't know what to say right now. I need a breather. And this allows a little time to process what we're feeling and whether we're misunderstanding. Sometimes just a half hour is enough to regroup, and sometimes it may take a little more space. What we're looking for, and this is important, we're looking for an opening. We're looking for an opening. In other words, we're checking in with ourselves to see if we're open to growth because we're definitely having a growth opportunity, as they say. So we want to be sure that we are feeling open before we go back into the conversation. And we also need to give the other person enough space that they are also feeling open enough. Because if they aren't, or if we aren't, there's not a thing in the world that we can do. Remember the list I showed you earlier, the one where we get frustrated or we begin to become unhinged? Well, that's exactly where we'll cycle back to if one of us or both of us aren't open enough yet. But if we find ourselves stuck again in our communication, guess what? We just rinse and repeat. We tell them, I don't know what to say right now. Let's take a breather. Or we can simply ask if they need a breather, and they'll probably clamor at that one with a resounding yes. And then we can try again in a half hour. Our task is to keep our heart space open. We want to keep our heart space open. If we can do that, if we can keep our heart space open no matter what, then we are coming from a place of love and patience and compassion. Our heart chakra can assist in heart to heart communication. And this is all we're really required to do because this is important. So I put it up on the screen here. All that's required ever is a shift in frequency, a shift in energy, a shift in our emotions, right? But that's all that's ever required is a shift in our frequency. If we can shift into love and patience and compassion, that's all that's required of us. Because whatever the breakdown in communication was, we must know that compassion or a need for compassion is at the bottom of all of it. Now, a side note, if we find that the other person simply cannot open their heart space, then that's our cue that we may never have the open, compassionate experience with them that we'd hope to have. They may not be capable of a healthy relationship. They may not be capable, and that's okay. We need to be open enough ourselves to see that taking care of our own energy comes first, putting on our own oxygen mask. That's what comes first. If we can take care of ourselves in the face of this truth that maybe they can't open their heart space, if we can take care of ourselves in the face of this truth, then we are experiencing spiritual growth and we're growing spiritually. Okay. Now, I don't often talk about the chakras, but our heart chakra can assist in heart to heart communication. And maybe you've never considered this idea. So, the chakras are located along the spine in the lower torso of the body, starting with the red chakra, which is our root chakra, moving up to the orange chakra there in the belly, up into the yellow chakra in our solar plexus, and the green chakra in our heart space. Now, the lower chakras tend to react and respond. The lower chakras tend to react and respond to the immediate problems of our physical bodies, our emotions, and our reactions to incoming communication. So the heart chakra can be shut down by this incoming communication. But as we move up along our spine, if we are coming up through our heart, then we also move up into the throat chakra and on up. And now in the throat chakra, we're here in the area of communication. We cannot move into the higher frequency of thought or into a higher consciousness through that crown chakra if we don't have an open heart and if we aren't in communication from the heart. Our communication gets stuck if we're dealing with negative ego based fears and emotions. It'll get stuck down there in those lower chakras. If we're communicating from the voice of ego, then we aren't communicating from the heart. Okay, I think this is a pretty simple concept to understand. When we use heart based words and heart based language, our voice brings to life a certain frequency. So, honest, open, heart based communication is a precious resource. Of course, we have to know what we think before we can communicate it. And that's why we sometimes may need a bit of a timeout, maybe a half hour to go reflect on our objective. Because our objective may have been based in ego thinking, and our soul may need a little time for us to course correct so that our objective becomes compassion. Oh, let me say that again. Our objective may have been based in ego thinking, and now our soul is asking us to course correct so that our objective becomes compassion. All right. So we need to know what we think before we can communicate it from the heart space. When we're puzzling through a situation, it tends to go around and around in our head without ever revealing the key to untangling the puzzle. When we think out loud to ourselves, we know that our concerns are sacred to us, and this can invoke our guidance system. We may think out loud as we write in our journal, or we may think out loud into our smartphone using a recorded journal entry. Whatever method we use, we aren't looking to vacillate or ruminate or keep things circling around in our head. We're looking for what is our objective? What do we truly want? Is it to increase our love or our joy in our life? Is it to grow as a person? Is our objective to develop compassion? What is our objective in this puzzling situation? When our heart space is open and we're coming from a place of compassion, that heart energy can be perceived by the other person. They realize that we aren't trying to hurt them, but we're trying to understand their perspective. We aren't trying to be right, we're trying to bring compassion to the situation. Okay. Now, just to break down the anatomy, because I just love the anatomy of things. If we can take the incoming information that we're receiving and run all our incoming feelings and thoughts from the lower chakras up into our heart chakra, we're clearing out our energy pipeline to prepare that heart space. And as we achieve an open heart space, we can begin to speak with all the integrated energies of all our chakras. We keep that flow going from lower chakras to the heart, back down to lower chakras, and back up again, transmuting energy as it travels along our energy pipeline, updating and increasing our understanding and integrating it as we go. Now, this may all happen in a split second, or it may take us a few minutes. But this enables us to understand, and our attention and communication then becomes a gift of love. It helps the other person open their heart space. All right. Well, I hope this is all making sense for you, maybe in a way you hadn't thought about before. So let's talk for a moment about clarifying questions. And what I mean by this is that we are asking questions either of ourself if we're in quiet reflecting time or of the other person. And we're looking for clarity with our questions. We aren't blaming, we aren't judging. We're simply looking for clarity. We aren't saying, why did you do that and screw that all up? That would be blaming or judging. We're looking for clarity. I just have a clarifying question. I'd like to understand XYZ. See the difference? We don't want to make incorrect assumptions about the other person's unspoken feelings. I have been surprised so many times in my life to discover that what I thought was a situation with another person wasn't it at all. And aiming from that incorrect assumption, my words may not carry the truth that I intend to share. And this is why we want to ask clarifying questions. We may not be in touch with our own thoughts or feelings either. We may be offering what used to be a truth about ourselves, but now it needs updating. Oh, this is a big one because we have a tendency to want to be right. And even if we hear something completely screwed up coming out of our mouth, we don't necessarily stop mid sentence and say, oh, never mind, my truth just needs to be updated. Somehow it just doesn't work that way. Especially after a trauma or a spiritual injury, our thoughts and opinions develop and change. They morph, and so our objectives may also change. Having a half hour to reflect and redefine and get clarity on our objective, or allowing the other person to do the same, well, it's hugely beneficial. All right. Getting in touch with our true and unvarnished feelings in our heart space, not in the space of ego, can be really hard to do. We've had a lot of training during our childhood, during our life experiences on how we are to feel and what we should think. And we have a set of polite responses which we try to get out in order to grease the social machinery. And at first, these guidelines and learned responses are helpful to a growing personality, helps us find our way. But after a while, they may become robotic. They may kind of become automatic and nothing close to what our true feelings are. It's easy to slip or even slide away from open, honest words. We may fear that we won't be heard accurately. We may fear that our honesty may hurt the other's feelings. We may fear they will reject us if they know what we truly think, or we simply may not know what we think yet. But here's what happens. Remember a while ago when we started talking about chakras and how incoming communication can move up each chakra and either open our heart space or close it off? If we don't have clarity about what we think about a situation we're in, we may find ourselves speaking from one of our lower chakras rather than speaking from our heart. Our language may come out as defensive or hurtful when all we really need is a little clarity in getting to the core of our situation. Now, we've heard from different communication experts that we should always begin our sentence with I so that the two people won't keep accusing each other, as in, you did this and you said that. Some of the experts want us to keep our sentences beginning with I. But what I really want to emphasize here is that sometimes in using the word I, we're selfishly bringing the conversation back to our ego. Sometimes in using that word I, we're selfishly bringing the conversation back to our ego. And maybe you've never thought of it this way. But in beginning our sentences with I, we are avoiding our heart space and allowing ego to take over. It's something to consider, right? So we want to, in communication, listen from our heart space and keep the unhealthy conversations of ego out of our communications. This attentiveness just may help the other person to relax enough that they can get into their heart space as well. We can even create a circle of seeking or a circle of understanding and have some ground rules while we sit inside this circle. And I may have mentioned before that I often have to hold my hand over my heart to be sure I'm staying in that heart space. Or one of my favorite activities is that I have a heart shaped pillow. And so whoever is holding that heart shaped pillow to their heart has the floor. And the other person can't speak or interrupt except to ask clarifying questions. And this allows breathing room for better and higher thought patterns and deeper, richer compassion. Because at the end of the day, we are all one. I am you and you are me. We're all one. And as we hold the space for others to grow, just as much as we hold ourselves in the space to grow, we're creating an empowering environment without those unhealthy conversations of ego. All right. As we empower ourselves towards self expression of who we are at our core without the negative thoughts and emotions that can drain us, we're choosing a higher frequency, higher and better thoughts, better communication. Because our choice of frequency, our choice of more positive emotions and more positive words changes the course of our journey. So, reflecting back on everything we covered today, how can you apply what you've learned? Today was all about why can't we communicate? The unhealthy conversations of ego. So, as you reflect back, what were your three favorite takeaways? Well, my favorite takeaways: one, knowing that communication usually gets stuck when ego comes to the party. Two, sometimes the other person simply can't open their heart space. And if that's the case, that's our cue that we may never have the open, compassionate experience with them that we'd hoped to have. And they may not be capable of a healthy relationship, and that's okay. If we can take care of ourselves in the face of that truth, then we are growing and expanding. And my number three takeaway, my favorite takeaway from today, I think, is that sometimes in focusing on using the word I in conversation so as not to blame or judge the other person, we might actually be selfishly bringing the conversation back to our ego. So, those are my favorite takeaways, and I'd love to hear about yours. I hope this helps you as you're using the powers of alchemy to transform challenges and obstacles into positive new successes. This podcast is all about helping you have success on your spiritual growth journey. It's all about getting unstuck by unlocking your hidden power. If you still can't get your head around what's got you stuck in life or in business, you can tell me about it. You can send me a question to questions at unlockyourhiddenpower.com, or you may not know that you can get a free copy of my latest book at unlockyourhiddenpower.com. You'll discover the 22 undeniable laws of alchemy and how to take a wrecking ball to doubt, worries, frustration, and indecision so that your challenges evaporate right before your eyes. You can get your instant download at unlockyourhiddenpower.com. Well, thank you for joining me today, and I'm wishing you a life filled with all the alchemy you need to bring success to you. Feel free to share this video with anyone you know who's feeling stuck, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.